You know, Dan, all through this meeting, I've really been aware of your silence. You know, I almost get the feeling like you're miles away somewhere.
Well, I came 5–10 minutes late, and I've been having a hard time figuring out what's going on. So I guess that's why I haven't had much input. Because
You mean since you were late, you never could understand what was happening here in the group?
Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't want to say something and not know what I was talking about.
Well, you know, you were usually late. I was just wondering, well, why can't you get here?
Did something specific happen today? I mean, something that made you late today, or what?
He's very often late. I make an effort to get here on time. I don't know why you can't.
Well, it's my practice. You know, I've got a waiting room full of patients, and I've got somebody in every chair, and I'm a dentist. I can't just walk off and leave somebody with a half-filled tooth.
Well, how about just, rescheduling your clients?
Oh, I wish I could. The turnover of my staff is really, really high. It's chaotic, and then there's people calling in for emergencies, and everything's always changing. And well, maybe that's something I can work on in the group. Would be my attitude towards management. You know, I really try to get here. I mean, I really do try to get here on time, but it's just impossible.
I don't buy it.
Well, I just get upset when someone's not here. You know, I feel like it's something I said. Like last week when I said you were a dentist 24 hours a day. I thought maybe I might have hurt your feelings when I said that. And it's just really been hard for me to concentrate in this meeting today. Maybe you could call next time. Call Joan or Irv, or just let us know you're going to be late so we won't have to worry about you.
I second that, Dan. Otherwise, it keeps the group members guessing as to what's happening.
There must be a way for Dan to get here on time. I mean, you made a commitment to the group, Dan, to be here on time. We all make sacrifices. I drive an hour from San Francisco, and I get here on time.
Yeah, there's really no sin in building a little bit of slack into your schedule, I mean, even if you got here a little bit early, you could, sit outside and talk with everybody. That wouldn't be so bad, would it?
You see, this is the kind of pressure I get at home. I'm between my patients and my staff and my students. I teach at dental school, and then my wife and my kid, and I just need to give myself a little slack, to have some place I can have some peace and quiet, and that's probably why I don't say much here, because it's nice to have a place that I can come to where there's not a lot of demands being made on me all the time.
Yeah, but what about the commitment to yourself? I mean, this group is for you too. I mean, if you don't put anything in, you just sit there silent, how are you going to get anything out of it?
Yeah, that's a good question, Betty. I'm just aware of your situation in the group today as I sort of think about it, Dan. The idea that you come late, that you are forced into silence because you don't feel you've got the right to ask anyone any questions, and remain kind of uninvolved in the group for the entire meeting. There's got to be some other options for you.
Well, yeah, I could not come.
Did you ask someone to summarize the group for you, Dan?
No. I walked in and Darlene was going through this what was a very important thing for her, and I had made enough of a disturbance already just by coming late. I didn't want to interrupt anything more that Darlene had to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, how long would it have taken for someone to summarize the group for Dan? Just a couple of minutes? Darlene, would you have been upset with that?
No, I really would have preferred, Dan, if you'd, asked for a summary, rather than being quiet. I would have liked to have known what you were thinking, what you had to say about what I was saying.
Yeah, well, yeah, but there's probably other people that don't feel that way, that wouldn't say anything because they want to be polite.
Who would that be?
Well, Bob.
I wouldn't mind, and I wouldn't be polite about it either. It's not a matter of being polite. I think it would be good for the group.
Yeah, I don't mind.
And Kathy.
I don't mind at all. With Darlene, I'd much prefer it than you being silent.
Silent and then not being able to offer anything, say, to Darlene because of your silence. You know, just imagine the situation reverse. Imagine that you're talking in the group, Darlene comes in a few minutes late, and she asks you, you know, what's going on? Would you mind summarizing for me real quickly? Would you mind?
No.
You wouldn't mind?
No.
So it's okay for Darlene to do that to you, but not okay for you to do that to Darlene. How come?
I guess it's okay for other people to do things that it's not okay for me to do.
That sounds important.
Dan, as Betty pointed out, you do have a commitment to yourself by being in the group. And I'm wondering if you have trouble asking for time from the other group members, whether you're able to get what you need from the group.
Yeah, I don't think I feel I get my share of time here, attention.
Well, how are you getting help? You know, I'm not sure what's happening here for you, Dan. 'Cause you're so vague.
All these things take time. And it takes X amount of time to fill a cavity. And you can't rush these things. I think I've learned quite a bit here so far.
I'm still uncertain as to why Dan is here.
Well, yeah, it wasn't really my idea. I'm in marriage therapy. We have a counselor. And he suggested that it would speed up the process if I joined a group. And this is my third marriage, and so I figured that anything else that might help it work out. I have a 2-year-old, and so I thought it'd be a good idea. And my wife really pushed me, insisted that I do this.
So it sounds like you're here because the marriage counselor sent you here, or because your wife insisted that you're here, or you're here for the marriage, but that you're not here for you yourself.
Why are you in marriage therapy?
You know, I come home and I'm hoping for a little peace and quiet, and as soon as I get in the door, the wife's at me with this and she's at me with that. You know, I just feel like I don't have any time on my own, you know, and it's just like that at the office, and it's all day long. People are making these demands and those demands, and then she does the same thing. You know, like we went on a vacation last summer to get away and have a little time. And first thing that happens, when we go in this hotel, and she starts arguing with the clerk about the room, and it didn't have a good enough view. And then she gets mad at me because I'm not arguing with the clerk. I mean, I didn't go there for more stress. You know, I went there to get away from some of this, and she just wants to bring it everywhere that we go and create it when there isn't any. She's irrational all the time.
Well, I have a suggestion. Why don't you try for like a 30-minute buffer time when you get home, so I provide a transition from work to your home situation.
We've tried that. I mean, it's a good idea. It's just that she gets, she thinks about things all day, and when I come home, she wants to deal with them right away, and she expects me to answer, and there it goes. And I don't want to have to always be telling her, reminding her what the rules are,
Why is she so unhappy?
Oh, it's the old thing about she decides to become a mother, and then she's sorry she gave up her work, and now she resents it.
Is she in therapy?
Yeah.
If it's her problem, then why are you in treatment?
Well, we have to live with each other. I mean, it's our problem. It's not just...
Dan, maybe we should stick to your part of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've got some problems, I guess. I mean, we all have... Everybody's got problems of some kind. Yeah, I mean, we go back to when I was a kid. My dad was an alcoholic. My folks were divorced, and I never really felt comfortable at school because I was a kid whose folks were divorced, and I wasn't much one for sports, and I wasn't competitive with the other boys, and all this stuff. But that's all past. I'm a very successful dentist. I've got a professional career. I don't think that's a problem anymore.
I still don't understand. I don't know where you fit in. I'm really stuck. How are we going to be able to help you here if it's your wife who needs the therapy?
You feel stuck too, Dan?
Well, I mean, sometimes I wonder what good the group is going to do. But it's been really interesting for me. And I mean, I've enjoyed watching everybody and feel like I've learned a lot from being a part of this.
I feel a little uncomfortable saying this, but Dan, remember what you told me when we went out for coffee after one of the meetings? It was a couple of weeks ago. You said you felt like you weren't getting any help at all, and that this group was an imposition on your time.
Well, I didn't really mean it that way. Like I said, I have a hard time getting here, and I have to usually rush the whole afternoon to get here, and sometimes I wish it wasn't quite so hard to get here. But I find it very interesting once I'm here. I mean, I really enjoy it.
Well, just schedule one less patient on Wednesdays. Just one.
It's not that easy. I mean, emergencies come up, and patients are always calling in with this, and things are not in my control all the time.
Dan, I'd like you to go back just a few minutes, back to what Kathy was saying to you about your conversation with her outside the group. I think it's so important for you to try to speak here spontaneously, because I think you've got some really strong feelings about the group that you were honest in expressing to her, feelings about what you're not getting from the group. So I wonder if you could try expressing these. Tell us exactly what you think about the group without quite being so tactful, without being so diplomatic, without worrying quite so much about how we're going to feel. Could you speak right from the heart, speak straight?
It's the same thing. I mean, speaking from the heart, I have really found this group interesting, and I really have learned a lot from being here and watching everybody and what they do, and being part of this group.
Isn't this what you're feeling, Dan? Try this. All this time wasted, all this money wasted, all this rushing around, all the stuff I'm doing. It's my wife's problem, not mine. I'm not getting a goddamn thing from all this.
I never said that I felt that it was a waste of time being here, or that the rushing around, it's a little inconvenient, but I mean, it's the price you pay for something like this, that's all. That's all. I really find it interesting. It's worth it to me,
Where are the rest of you on this? Could we give some feedback to Dan? What are you all feeling at this point?
I feel like I don't know what you feel.
I think he's a really nice guy.
Maybe too nice.
Listen, try this. Just try thought experiment for a couple of minutes. You see Dan here, you live with him, in a sense, for an hour and a half once a week. Just imagine living with Dan, each of you, being married to Dan, relating to him 24 hours a day. What kind of experience would that be like? You know, get yourself into that. What feelings would get evoked by that experience?
To me it would be like living alone. You know, because remember, Dan, you said once that your wife accused you of being absent? For me, that's a perfect word for you, absent. You're never really here with me. I mean, look at your chair. Even your chair is a couple of inches out of the circle.
You know, I've noticed that too. I mean, it's not enough to comment on, but it's certainly enough to be irritating. I don't know, it would be so frustrating never being able to find Dan, not knowing where he was.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't feel like a marriage. I mean, I really wouldn't feel like I know who you are. And, you know, it would feel like you were trying to manage me, not relate to me.
You know, I think I'd be constantly saying, where are you? You know, I can't find you. I really think that I'd be getting angrier and angrier, too. I'd put a lot of demands on you. Probably even get shrill or irrational, just like your wife. I really think so.
You know, I've been aware over the last few minutes we've been sort of escalating the force of our comments to you. I think I've been doing it, Joan's been doing it, I think all the people here have been doing it. And I think it's an important phenomenon that's been occurring. It's almost as though that to kind of get through and help you speak with your real voice, we've got to keep on getting more and more angry, or to use Betty's words, more and more shrill. It's almost a replica, I wonder, of what might happen at home. You know, that your wife somehow kind of increases the ante, keeps on knocking in a way to kind of talk, help you talk in your real voice. This vignette illustrates many important issues for group therapy technique. First of all, early on there's a mention of Dan's coming in late, and the fact that tends to be disruptive to the group. Alice mentioned, for example, that when he was late she began to have fantasies about whether it was something she had done in the previous meeting. And so we set down a rule that I think is important for groups, is that when people are going to be late or when people are not going to be able to make it, that they call in advance, just to quiet down a lot of often wasted activity for that. But I think there's a very important issue that's fairly clearly illustrated in this vignette, and that had to do, of course, with the question of Dan and his relationship to his wife, but also his relationship to the other group members. You know, at first Dan says, well, it's not his fault. Nothing is his fault. Not even his lateness is his fault. The group tends to give a lot of suggestions about things he might do about that, but pretty soon they begin to see that he has a ready rebuttal for each of these answers. And I think gradually the group begins to discover that the reasons for his lateness are pretty deeply ingrained in the depths of his personality structure. Dan's posture throughout this part of the meeting is that it's not his responsibility, that these are things that his wife does, that it's not even his responsibility that he's in therapy, that he was sent by other people, sent by his marriage counselor, sent by his wife. The group starts to deal with this with some suggestions that are offered, but suggestion and advice given by groups is almost invariably a fairly ineffective way to operate in a group, and you begin to see how that operates. People say, well, how about a 30-minute buffer zone when you get home? How about filling one less cavity, scheduling one less patient? But each of these are rejected. Then the group begins to suggest, well, listen, if it's your wife's problem, what are you doing here? What is your role in what goes on and what goes wrong in your relationship? That begins to move the things into a somewhat more fruitful direction. Then later, we begin to get some feedback for Dan, not about suggestions, not about ideas that they have about his marital situation, but how they're feeling about his behavior towards them right here in the here and now. And then, in fact, when we begin to up the ante on that, sort of increase the leverage by getting feedback about how people would feel, not by just living with him for an hour and a half a week, as they do in this group, but suppose they lived with him for 24 hours a day at home. Then the feedback became, I think, much more pointed. People began to say, well,
yeah, I mean, it wouldn't feel like a marriage.
they'd feel
I mean, I really
they
wouldn't
couldn't
feel
find
like
him,
I
that he was
know
absent,
who you
that even
are.
his chair being
Yeah,
outside the
you know,
circle was
it would feel like you
reflective
were
of
trying
his
to
being
manage me,
absent,
right?
or that they'd feel that they
I
were
think I'd be constantly
managed,
saying,
they
"Where
weren't
are
really
you?
being
You know, I can't
cared
find
for
you."
or in a
I
relationship.
really think that I'd be getting
And so then
angrier
gradually,
and angrier too.
what
I'd put a
begins
lot
to
of
happen
demands on you.
is that soon the
Probably even get
situation
shrill
outside in
or
Dan's
irrational, just
marriage
like your
begins
wife.
to be
I really think
recapitulated
so.
in the here and now of the group in a way that I think is fairly self-evident on the tape. The tone begins to be more shrill. There's a sort of a sledgehammer approach where people are becoming more and more forceful, in other words, to make Dan hear and to try to understand and experience what his real feelings are, because no one really knows what he feels. He's always checking out the environment, seeing what people want from him, and then tend to give them that. So you lose the person in there. And that, of course, illustrates this extremely important aspect of group theory, which is the idea that I alluded to in the previous tape, that the here and now, in the here and now, that the group operates as a social microcosm, that behavior that people manifest towards others in their life soon begins to be manifested towards other people in the group, provided you don't structure the group too heavily. Sooner or later, all these traits, if people are arrogant, or people are obsequious, or people are vindictive, if people are self-effacing, all these traits begin to be evident in the way that people respond towards others in the group. So there's no need to spend a great deal of time on people giving you information about the past or even about their present life. It begins to transpire in the living data that we begin to examine right in the group. Now, that means that a focus on the here and now de-emphasizes the past historical material, de-emphasizes even the current outside material that's going on in their life right now. By de-emphasis, I'm not saying that we're negating the importance of these, but I'm saying from the standpoint of therapeutic power, we're much better off by focusing on the immediate transactions that occur within the group. Now, there's one other point that just is mentioned in a second, but it's worth taking a look at, and that's the issue of extra group socializing in a therapy group. That occurs in almost every group. I've long ago learned that it's an error to say to members of the group that you don't want members to see one another outside the group, because what happens then is it is almost invariably does occur, and then members keep it secret. They don't tell you about it, or it becomes a whole issue of whether or not they're breaking your rules or not breaking your rules. So I feel that it's much more important to explain to members how extra-group socializing can get in the way of therapy. And it usually gets in the way of therapy if members meet outside the group and form some type of relationship that becomes very important to them, and then they keep that secret. There's a conspiracy of silence around that. So they don't talk in the group about what they've talked about outside the group. And then they cease to be of use to one another because they stop talking to one another in the group. They don't want to betray the friendship or betray what the other had said. So extra-group socializing can be, in a sense, injurious to the group. But if, on the other hand, you've made it very clear to the group members why it's injurious to the group and elicit some type of contract from them that if they do meet with others outside the group, that they will take it as their responsibility to bring that material back into the group, then it can be quite facilitative of the group. And indeed, that's exactly what happened in this group when Kathy mentioned that she had met with Dan outside the group and then related to the group what Dan had told her about the fact that he had said to her that he had severe doubts about whether or not this group was being useful to her.
I didn't really mean it that way.
Incidentally, when you've made it very clear to the group members about why extra-group socializing can in fact get in the way of therapy, can sabotage the therapy. And then it happens, you're in a much stronger position to confront the patients, because you're no longer confronting the patient with the issue of how come you're breaking my rules, but you're confronting the patient with a much more powerful question of, well, how come you're sabotaging your own therapy? And I think you've got much more leverage when you work in that direction. Okay, now let's turn to our fourth and last vignette. This is an episode that occurs in the 8th meeting towards the end of the session.
It's something I've been wanting to tell you. I'm bisexual. Well, I guess I had to get that out, you know. I guess I wouldn't be helped if I didn't.
I'm glad you're bringing it up.
Has this been something that's always been the case?
I don't know. I guess ever since I was around 13, I guess I felt that way.
Well, you know, I'm always been, you know, I really don't understand bisexuality. Is there a predominant preference?
No, not really. I guess I'm pretty lucky. I have the best of both worlds.
Is this one of the reasons why you broke up with your girlfriend?
I've heard that bisexuality is related to families that don't have a father, or the father's there but he's not around very much. Is that the case with you?
No, I've never heard that before. You know, our family was very supportive. My father was there. We had a tight-knit group.
Doctor, did you find that to be the case?
No, I'm not sure about that, Betty, but you know, I'm very much aware, though, of something else, and that is, obviously it's difficult for you to say this in the group. I'm sort of thinking of what it's been like for you to come to the group for 8 sessions and have this on your mind and be unable to say, well, what kind of experience has that been for you?
Well, you know, I've been wanting to tell you for some time, and last week, I was going to come in and tell you last week, and when I got here, I guess I chickened out again.
What were your fears or fantasies of what would happen if you were to bring this up?
Well, you know, the usual, what people say behind your back, and I mean, this is the first time I've ever said it to anyone, you know, publicly. And I feel that, well, I felt from the beginning I have a part that I play in this group, and this is where I belong. I feel I'm stuck between 2 different worlds.
Oh, I feel you belong here very much. I don't know, I've always thought you were very forthright and refreshing.
Alan, I have gay friends, and I'm sure the other group members know people who are gay. I really don't think you should feel that different.
Well, you know, I guess it was the men, you know. It's like whenever you tell them you're bisexual, they think you're trying to make a play for them or something. Well, you know, there's so many stereotypes, there's so many distortions about the quote-unquote gay world.
Yeah, you know, I don't think that you have to worry about this group. I think the group's going to be very supportive for you. And if you're worried about, I mean, I know for myself, it's not a problem.
I don't feel any differently about you. I mean, we may not be big buddies, old buddies in this group, but, you know, we've been together for 8 sessions, and, you know, we still care about you.
Oh, sure. I mean, we've all gotten to know you in all the sessions, and everyone has really appreciated what you've contributed to the group. So I don't think anyone's going to change their opinion of you.
Yeah, I'm so pleased you're able to bring this up. And I'm also curious as what's made it possible for you to bring it up to the group today.
Well, I guess, you know, the last few weeks I've felt more trust and just feel comfortable with the group now.
And those fears you had about bringing today, you felt that you'd lose face, you know. Before whom would you lose face? Who's going to judge you? Who's the Chief Justice here?
You, Joan, you know, I know I was supposed to tell the truth in the initial screening, and I felt that, you know, maybe I'd probably be refused. You know, and I really hope you're not angry today.
You mean you thought that if you told Joan and me when we first saw you about your bisexuality that we would have rejected you for the group?
Basically, yeah.
Huh. Never would have entered my mind. And the other judges, who else do you think?
Well, Darlene and Bob, you know.
Well, to be perfectly honest, Alan, I certainly wouldn't be in judgment with you. Actually, when I was 11 or 12, I had a homosexual experience with a really good friend of mine, and quite a few years after that, I was really conscious, worried about my sexual place in the world, I guess, you know.
I don't know. I tell you, it's so difficult being a part of the gay community. You know, I mean, especially today. You know, with all the AIDS things. You know, and everyone is so frantic. You know, and almost every woman that I've known, whenever I told her that I was bi, she freaked out. And it seems that even after all of that, no matter how difficult it is, I don't see myself changing, because I live a heterosexual life. I want a family. I deserve.
I want to just interrupt you for a minute, Alan, because I think something really important happened here just a couple minutes ago. I want to just focus on just a second. I'm really interested, Bob, in what you just said about your own gay experience when you were younger. Have you ever said that before to anyone else?
Once, 10 years ago, to my therapist.
And until this moment, this group, you've never told anyone else, never told peers?
No, I've never told any group of people that, no.
I have a hunch that that was a real gift to Alan.
I don't know. I guess I get so wrapped up in my own emotions, I don't think about other people's feelings. I guess that's what Betty meant when she told me about it a couple of weeks ago.
But Alan, I don't think you're still acknowledging Bob's gift to you.
I guess you're right. I don't know why it's so difficult for me just to come out and say thank you. I mean, thank you all, because you've all been supported and you've all helped me. I appreciate it. I got it off my chest.
I'm glad you did, Alan. You feel finished, or there are other parts of this you want to work on today?
Well, no, not today.
As far as you want to go today.
Well, I'm concerned about Betty. Earlier, Betty, you mentioned about your daughter's drug problem, but I don't think you were finished.
Yeah, Betty, I feel like we left you hanging, and now we're almost out of time.
No, really, I feel fine. We talked about it. I got it out and spoke with you, and I feel fine about it.
Betty, what did you get from the group today? I know you brought up a really significant problem. What do you feel that we were able to give you?
Well, I don't know. I think what I really wanted to do the most was bring everybody up to date, you know, on what was going on in my life. That's really about all I wanted to do. Yeah, I feel fine.
But I'm still wondering exactly what you got from this today, Betty. I mean, she brought a problem to us, and we were never able to solve it for her.
Yeah, what would be a solution to her problem?
Can we ever really solve a problem in the group? I mean, it's so complicated. I mean, what's happening with you and your husband and your daughter, I mean, we only know it from Betty's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a small part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. You might say I'm an engineer again, but how can we really deal with a problem when we're dealing with partial or inadequate data?
Yeah, yeah. You know, you mentioned earlier that this was something that you brought up with your individual therapist, and it seems to me that maybe that's the more appropriate place to deal with it. That he's maybe able to lead you to a resolution, whereas the group really can't. You know?
So if the issue then is if the group can't deal with this problem, or that we're going to get inaccurate data, or that it should be dealt with in individual therapy, it still leaves the question of what role this group can play, how this group can be helpful.
What did you get today, Betty? What did you want when you came in the group today?
Well, as I said, I wanted to talk about it. I think that really helps me when I can just talk it over with you and kind of bring you up on what's going on. And that's about all I really need, you know. Like you said, I had mentioned that I talk about it to my therapist, but it's not the same. You know, there's so much support here in the group. When I can talk with all of you, I get that real supportive feeling.
Well, you got a lot of advice today, Betty. See a lawyer, family meetings with your husband and daughter, and a drug rehab program for your daughter. You think these suggestions are going to help?
Well, they're all wonderful suggestions. They really are, you know, and I appreciate all of them. But the trouble is I have to get the, you know, others involved to go along with it. You know, now I did get a lawyer, but that hasn't helped with getting any support from my husband at all, you know, none. And as far as my daughter's concerned, I've been trying to get her into a drug rehab center for a long time, and she just will not go. And I can't get her to go no matter what. And then I feel if I really push her in there, you know, or get her in there against her will, that's not going to do any good anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm, you know, kind of at a standstill.
You know, I'm aware that we seem to be kind of circling things, because I know this sounds very much like what we were saying in the very beginning of the meeting. And, you know, on one hand, you could think that, you know, that Betty says, well, she's satisfied with what she got from the group today. But on the other hand, I mean, we can't seem to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
We keep on coming back, we keep on
Mm-hmm.
circling back, coming back to Betty, even though she says she's satisfied with what she got in the group. You know, the reason that particularly I think is important is because I think we've been doing something similar about the last 3 meetings. You know, somebody is coming into the group with a real life crisis, and we don't seem to be able to find a way to solve that, and yet we can't let it go. So the whole meeting has been very much directed with all of us trying to do this one-to-one work with each person. So I guess the issue is, are you satisfied with that? Is that what we want to be doing here? Is that the best way to use the group? How did that pattern get started? You know, it wasn't my idea or Joan's.
No, I speaking for myself, I think that, like when you told us that today about your daughter, especially, I mean, I felt so bad. I really wanted to be able to help you in some way. You know? And you know, something else about it too. I mean, I don't really feel like you've gotten enough time in the group. And like the time I had a few sessions ago, I mean, it was tremendous. It was tremendously helpful. And so also, I guess it's a way of
You know, the time you're talking about your problems with your wife?
yeah, the thing with all the marital difficulties. I guess it's a way then also of repaying you in a sense. I mean, giving you your time, because I know how valuable that is.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Dan. You know, I think that was a really good working meeting. You remember that meeting?
Mhm.
You know, I wonder who's got some ideas about what was different about that meeting from what we've, say, been doing today or the last couple of weeks. Any ideas how we work differently with Dan?
Well, the one thing that I noticed was, as a group, we started with Dan's problem that was outside of the group. You know, we brought it down to what's Dan's role with his problem and his responsibilities with what was going on with his marriage, and we brought it even further into the group with bringing that into what was his relationship with the women in this group.
I think we seem to work much better when we stick to things, problems right here in this group.
But it was different today with Betty. I mean, she was really hurting. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Say, we don't deal with life's emergencies? You know, you're about to lose your kid, that's not important enough?
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. You don't get enough time, Betty.
You know, we all seem to agree here that when we focus on what's happening right here between people, that's when we do the best. You know, that's happened over and over again in the group. You know, but we've got a real dilemma that's come up today in the last couple of weeks. What happens when someone brings up some sort of real, outside, important crisis in their life? You see, what's been going on today is that we try to find some way to solve that, and we're generally, for lots of different reasons, pretty ineffective at that. And we sort of know we're ineffective, and I'm pretty sure that's one of the reasons we're not able to let it go. We keep on circling and coming back to it. But on the other hand, you know, like Darlene says, we can't simply not pay attention to that. That would be insensitive. So, you know, that's a dilemma that we're facing. We have to find some way to do something about that. You know, we're going to have to stop today. Our time's just about up. But I think one of the things we've got to work on is how we find a way to offer you, Betty, something right here in the here and now, how we can help you more effectively.
You know, I know we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to add that I'm having trouble finding something for Betty. I mean, I know she's hurting, but I don't know if or how or how much. Like, even today, it's obvious that she's in some sort of pain, but I'm just guessing because it's no pain that I can see.
Asking for help is certainly not Betty's strong suit.
Yeah.
You know, I think this is really important. I think this is a good clue, because I've got very much the same feeling. You know, my feeling is, Betty, that you're very good at giving help, very good at it, but you're not good at finding ways to get help from other people. Yeah, speaking for myself, I find that I usually want to find ways to be more helpful to you, and I can't find a way to do it. You know, and in fact, you settle for very little in the group. Today, you settled for, I just want to be heard, and that's all. And yet, I feel there's a lot more we could give you. So that's something we really need to look at in the future. Okay, we gotta go.
No, wait. I got something I want to say. My therapist told me to tell you, I am quitting my individual therapy.
Your therapist. I didn't know you had an individual therapist.
Well, it's this telephone therapy.
Dial-a-shrink.
Well, no, it's this therapist that I had when I was in Atlanta, before I moved out here. And then we just stay in contact, and every couple weeks, you know, I've been talking to her. Well, glad I told you.
Well, you certainly didn't leave much time for us to discuss that in the group.
And what's this business your therapist told you to say it? Does that mean you wouldn't have said it if she hadn't told you?
Next time, Alan.
This vignette illustrates another aspect of norm setting. We've talked about other norms that we want to set in a therapy group. And in this segment, we're looking at the issue and the norm of self-disclosure. I think every therapist who leads a therapy group will agree that self-disclosure is important. It's important that people disclose. It's important that people disclose very fully as they go ahead and go along through the therapy group. I feel that I'd like members to do that. I'd also like them to feel, however, that that the group is not a forced confessional, that people can disclose when they're ready, when they feel enough trust in the group. They can disclose at their own pace. But there's another issue of disclosure that I think that that I think we should look at in this vignette, and that's the difference between vertical disclosure and horizontal disclosure. And by that I mean that vertical disclosure is disclosure in depth, disclosure as you plunge into the type of material that the person is talking and describing. Whereas horizontal disclosure is disclosure about the disclosure, meta-disclosure. And in a group, I think that you're far better off in the therapy process by encouraging horizontal disclosure rather than vertical disclosure. So in this vignette, Alan discloses a big secret. And the tendency of the group, and the tendency of most groups, is to probe for more vertical disclosure.
I really
People
don't
began to
understand
ask about
bisexuality.
more
Is there
details
a
about
predominant
bisexuality.
preference?
Well, when did it begin? What's it like?
No,
Who do you
not really.
prefer? Which sex do you
Some pretty
prefer?
lucky,
Or began intellectualizing a bit by talking about, well, family patterns in bisexuality. So that my stance and my response towards Alan was always in the direction of asking for more horizontal disclosure. So that's why I asked him about how hard it was for him to come to the group all these weeks and not talk about this. That's why I wondered to him about what made it possible for him to talk about that in the group today, or had him take a look at why he was afraid, what some of his fantasies had been about what might happen were he to have disclosed that. And then that brought up material about
I guess it was
his fears
I guess
about
it was
my
the men
response,
who-
or about my co-leader's response,
You
or
know, you tell 'em
his
you're
fears about
bisexual,
the
they
men's
think you're trying to make a
response
play for
to
them or
him
something.
in the
Like,
group.
you know, there's so many stereotypes.
Another important concept that comes up in this vignette, I think, is the fact that therapists in groups must make use of process. We think in terms of process. Now, the word process has a lot of different definitions. People use the word in different ways. When I use process, I mean it as almost an antonym in contrast to content. Let's say some people are having a discussion. You ask, well, what's the content of this discussion? It's pretty obvious. Content are the actual words, actual issues being discussed. But suppose you ask the question, what's the process of this discussion? Well, the answer to that question is you ask the question, what do these words tell you about the nature of the relationship of the people involved in the discussion? So when we ask a process question, or when we maintain a process orientation, we're always looking at the nature of the relationship, people involved. And I think there were two incidents in this group that illustrated that.
Quite a
One
few
of them
years after that, I
was
really
when Bob said
conscious,
that he too
worried
had
about
had a
my
homosexual
sexual-
experience
my
when he was quite young. And notice what happened then was
place
that
in the
Alan,
world,
in
I
a
guess,
sense,
yeah.
didn't acknowledge it. He simply went on
Oh,
talking
okay,
about
that's-
another issue
it's so
without
difficult
somehow acknowledging
being-
Bob. So then we began to
part of the gay
comment on what the
community.
process of that
Oh, wow.
was. The process of that being is that Bob had given Alan a gift, and Alan had refused to acknowledge it. That Alan had some significant issues that came up many times in this group in many different ways around intimacy, both with men and with females. He had a compulsive sexual pattern, a way of dealing with both men and women, but shied away from deeper intimate levels. And the fact that he shied
Yes, you're
away
right,
from Bob's really reaching out to him in a very human way,
And I don't know why
finding
it's
it
so
extremely
difficult when you just
difficult,
to
and
come
very
out and
embarrassing to thank Bob
say
for
thank
his
you.
gift. I think the other example of a process issue came up in the very last minute of the group when Darlene announced the group that she was at that point finishing therapy, and that her therapist told her to say that in the group. Now, she didn't leave much time. We don't find out much about that, about what the meaning of that comment was. It wasn't until a later meeting that we did. But if we, from the information that we were able to accumulate later, it seemed like there was some interesting process issues. One, which was the idea that Darlene had to almost convulsively break into the group, raise her hand to get some time. And that was a reflection of her feeling that she didn't have enough time in that group, or that the group was so busy with other things that she had to almost burst in. And I think the other thing was the fact that she was, in essence, saying to the group that because she was stopping therapy with her individual therapist in Atlanta, therefore, she was going to need a lot more support, a lot more attention from this group. And that was hard for her to say in any explicit way. So she disguised that as, if you will, by saying, well, my therapist told me to say that. Or she left it at the very last minute of the group, so there wasn't time for her to go ahead and discuss this openly. And the group caught all this, I think, just at the very end with a couple of the comments by the men in the group.
And what's this business your
Now,
therapist told you to say?
in this vignette, the group was also struggling with some procedural norms about how groups work, how this group could work. One of the things that had happened was that in the previous 3 meetings, I felt the group was having a difficult time with procedure because they had been crisis-oriented meetings. In other words, a member came in, brought a crisis, real-life crisis. The group had spent a lot of time trying to focus on that crisis, and they had been fairly ineffective meetings. That is not a good way to use a therapy group. The idea of someone bringing in an outside problem, members struggling to give suggestions about how to solve that problem is probably one of the worst ways to lead a group. So I was being fairly active here and trying to intercept that process from continuing. So I tended to, in a group, to identify that issue, say, look, this is what we've been doing. I wanted to let them know that it was a procedure that had evolved from the group itself. It wasn't my idea. This is not my idea of how the group should proceed. And I also wanted to let them know that it's been problematic, that we've not been able to solve problems in the way the group set about to do that for a number of reasons. One of which was Bob's sort of, as he put it, his engineer reason that the data is inaccurate. We only have partial data. And groups can't come up with a very workable solution under that situation. And then we went on to talk, as Dan said, well, I got a lot of help talking about the outside problem. So I quite intentionally asked the group to say, well, what did we do different with Dan in that last episode, that last vignette? And they could themselves say, well, look, we went from the outside issue, the way he was relating in the group, the way he was relating to the women in the group. And that was where the work was done. And so then at the very last part of that episode in this vignette, we then were struggling with the fact, well, we've got to find another way to offer her help rather than talking about the crisis that she has outside. And the group was just beginning to arrive at some ideas about that. They began to notice, well, she doesn't ask for help very easily, that she's a very good help giver, but not a very good help taker, or that she's satisfied with very little, or that she doesn't show her pain very much, so we don't know how and which ways and when she's hurting. So I think the groundwork was already being laid at that point for future work in the group with her in the here and now, rather than with her around a resolution, a solving of this outside crisis. You notice in this vignette and also in the previous 3, therapists have been fairly active. I've felt that it was part of my role to be quite active in shaping this group, shaping the norms, moving the group into the here and now, reminding them of how the here and now was most active, finding ways to get them from the outside material into the inside material, from impersonal material into personal material. As this group was to continue in the future, those efforts would be far less necessary on my part. The norms had become integrated, had become much more automatic on the part of the group members. The group members themselves were aware that they worked more effectively in certain ways and less effectively in other ways. So this group, by the end of this 8th meeting, was poised at this point to enter into a state of a much more mature, hard-working group.